He sat strapped to a wooden chair in the middle of the plague ward, his wrists bound, eyes wide with terror. The room stank of vinegar, rot, and scorched hair. A man in a beaked mask hovered nearby, not to offer comfort, but to slice open his veins. And he wasn't the first. This wasn't some dark punishment. This was the cure. In the darkest days of the Black Death, Europe didn't just fear the plague, it feared the healers more. Bloodletting was the first and most trusted response. The idea? Drain the sickness out. The result? Thousands died from shock, infection, or sheer blood loss long before the plague ever finished its job. In some towns, you were more likely to die from the doctor's blade than the rat's bite. But this was just the beginning. Barbers doubled as surgeons, sharpening razors between scalpels, often not bothering to clean them. In one French account, from 1349, a boy who only had a fever was treated with deep incisions in his legs. He bled out within minutes. His parents were told, better to die pure than to suffer long. That was what passed for mercy. No one was safe. Rich or poor, if you showed symptoms, sneezing, boils, fever, you were rushed to treatment, which meant bleeding, burning, or being forced to inhale boiling herbs through pipes shoved in your nose. One English noblewoman was sealed in a room filled with sulfur smoke until she choked to death. Her doctor claimed he was trying to cleanse her lungs. He was promoted weeks later. Even children were not spared. In monasteries, monks believed disease was a punishment for sin, and children were flogged to drive out the demon. Entire villages practiced ritual burnings, not of the sick, but of their clothing, their furniture, even their food. Everything they touched was torched. If they survived, they were left with nothing. Often, the cure left them homeless, starving, and still sick. Worst of all were the mercy killings disguised as treatment. In a Milanese hospital, plague victims were given concoctions of wine and powdered lead to relax the soul, they said. In reality, it was a slow, choking death. The nurses would sing hymns as they administered it, believing they were doing God's work. And, in a way, they were, sending hundreds straight to him. So next time someone says, "At least they tried," remember, in the 14th century, a doctor's visit could be the most dangerous part of being sick. And for many, the cure was the executioner. The plague didn't have to kill them. Medicine beat it to the punch. They believed the disease lived in the blood, that it was a demon crawling through the veins. So, to save a life, they drained it. The boy was no older than 10, barely conscious as the barber-surgeon sliced open the vein in his forearm. His mother watched from the corner of the hut, her knuckles white around a prayer cloth. Each drop of blood was supposed to carry the sickness away. But what no one said aloud was this: the bleeding often killed the patient long before the plague ever could. Leeching was even worse. Hundreds of small, writhing creatures were kept in wooden tubs, fed with the blood of livestock and prisoners. They were pressed onto children's skin, mouths wriggling until they latched on, engorging slowly. Some doctors claimed the leeches could sniff out corrupted blood. One monk even swore the more pain the patient endured, the more effective the cure. Screaming wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. Because if you screamed, they said, the demons were fleeing your body. In some villages, healers used heated irons to cauterize plague boils, pressing red-hot metal into open sores. The logic? Burn the body, burn the plague. But what it really did was trigger infection, shock, and agony beyond words. Victims often passed out before the second application. Those who survived the burn usually didn't survive the fever that followed. Still, they were considered lucky. It meant the treatment was working. That's what they told themselves anyway. But the worst cure of all was the forced purging. Doctors believed the plague was caused by an imbalance of the humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. So they made patients drink vile concoctions of vinegar, mercury, crushed beetles, or even lead shavings to induce vomiting and diarrhea. Buckets were placed on both ends of the patient, and they were told to purge until their bodies expelled the evil. Many died of dehydration or poisoning, but that was blamed on weakness of spirit, not the treatment itself. The religious authorities had their own cures. Inquisitors claimed the plague was divine punishment, so they led public processions where men and women whipped themselves with barbed cords, their backs flayed open, blood soaking the cobblestones. The idea was to cleanse sin through pain. In some towns, this self-purification ritual became mandatory. Miss one, and you were marked a heretic, sometimes dragged from your home and burned. By now, hundreds had died, not from plague, but from the treatments meant to save them. Families began to hide their sick, locking them in root cellars or barns, rather than risk the doctors coming. Some even fled into the woods, choosing wolves and starvation over bloodletting and fire. They weren't wrong. In more than a few towns, the death toll from medicine outpaced the death toll from the Black Death itself, and yet no one dared question the healers, because to challenge a cure was to challenge the will of God. They called him Dr. Aldrich, but no one knew his real name. He arrived in the dead of night, his boots crusted with mud and ash, a black leather beak protruding from his face like some demonic bird. Children cried at the sight of him. Dogs barked and then backed away, tails tucked. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The stench that followed him said enough. Inside the long-nosed mask were herbs, lavender, mint, dried rose petals, not to cure anything, but to drown out the rot. Because by the time the doctor visited a home, someone inside was already dying. The mask was never meant to protect. It was meant to keep the doctor sane, so he wouldn't vomit at the smell of death every time he breathed. What few knew was that the outfit itself was a lie. The black cloak, the gloves, the cane, it gave the illusion of knowledge. But behind the layers of leather and mystery was often a butcher, a failed apothecary, or worse, someone who had never treated a soul in their life. Anyone could claim the title plague doctor, as long as they could afford the costume, or steal one off a corpse. Dr. Aldrich's methods were cruel, even by medieval standards. He believed the plague was punishment for impure air, so he sealed the windows of homes with boiling tar. No fresh air, no escape, just heat, smoke, and the scent of your own rotting body. Some suffocated before the plague could finish them off. He also practiced a cure known only to traveling physicians, slicing open plague boils and stuffing the wounds with raw onions and garlic. They said it drew out the poison. In truth, it attracted flies. Insects laid eggs in the wounds, and days later, the patient would be covered in larvae, eating the flesh from within. Aldrich never flinched. He believed it was a sign the rot was leaving. Then came the smoke treatments. Families were locked inside their homes, and bundles of burning herbs, often mixed with sulfur or pitch, were tossed in through the chimney. Children screamed as the smoke thickened, eyes burning, lungs filled with ash. If the fire does not cleanse them, Aldrich said once, then they were never meant to be saved. What terrified people most wasn't just the death. It was how methodical it became. Aldrich kept notes. He counted boils. He weighed corpses. He documented suffering like a scholar collecting butterflies. To him, it wasn't horror, it was data. But one day, he vanished. No one saw him leave. His wagon, once heavy with supplies, stood empty. His mask hung from a tree outside town, fluttering in the wind like a ghost's face. Some say he died of the plague. Others say he ran when he realized his treatments had killed more than the disease ever could. But even years later, when the plague had faded, villagers claimed they still saw him, a shadowy figure in the mist, beaked mask gleaming beneath the moonlight, not saving lives, just watching. If cutting veins didn't work, maybe drinking the plague out would. That was the next step, and what they drank was unforgettable. The most popular cure in the latter years of the Black Death was a concoction so foul, so disturbing, that even those who prepared it often vomited from the smell alone. It was called theriac, a centuries-old recipe updated for plague times. A mix of over 60 ingredients, including viper flesh, rotting herbs, myrrh, opium, and ground-up mummies, Yes, actual human remains stolen from ancient tombs and sold in black markets as medicinal ash. But that was the refined version. The village version? That was worse. In rural areas, peasants created their own elixirs. One of the most horrifying included the urine of virgins, aged goat milk, and crushed toads. Another required wine steeped in the hearts of blackbirds, caught, killed, and soaked under moonlight. There were reports of a potion called the boil breaker, which contained pus extracted from someone already infected. The theory? A little plague would teach your body to fight the big one. But instead, people just died faster. Imagine standing in a candle-lit stone chamber, wrapped in furs, freezing, while a priest and a healer force down your throat a boiling mix of vinegar, ash, and bile. Your lips burn, your stomach twists, and somewhere deep in your belly you feel the liquid moving like it's alive. That sensation wasn't uncommon, because sometimes the potions were infested with maggots, with worms. People believed if it moved inside you, it meant it was working. Children were not spared. One recorded cure involved feeding infants a syrup made from boiled snakes and clove oil. Many suffocated from the thickness, others bled internally. Still, parents believed, because to do nothing felt like surrender. And while these drinks killed thousands, they made some very rich. Traveling potion sellers became a common sight. They wore beaked masks, not only to protect from the stench, but to appear mystical. Inside the beaks, herbs, rose petals, vinegar-soaked cloth. It didn't help, but it looked convincing. They'd arrive in towns with carts filled with colored bottles, each promising to stop the boils, clear the lungs, save the soul. People gave up their savings, their homes, some even traded children as servants, for a vial of hope. And these doctors vanished the moment the dying outnumbered the living. Some monasteries had their own brews, often involving holy water and crushed relics. One abbey was known to mix wine with splinters from the cross of a local martyr. Pilgrims walked miles to drink from it. Within weeks, the abbey became a graveyard. By the time the church began to question these cures, entire villages had already vanished. They didn't just die from the plague. They were poisoned in the name of salvation. The cure had become its own disease. By the time the Black Death had swallowed half of Europe, what remained wasn't medicine. It was madness dressed as salvation. The most terrifying thing wasn't how people died. It was what they were willing to believe in to survive. And, in a monastery deep in the Carpathian Hills, a final, desperate cure was born. One that would be remembered in whispers long after the bodies rotted. It began with a monk named Ewald. Once a healer, now a broken man, he claimed he'd received a vision. The plague wasn't a disease, it was a demon, and only holy suffering could banish it. He created what he called the Chamber of Penance, a stone room, sealed tight, with walls painted in lamb's blood. The ritual was brutal. The infected would be locked inside, without food, water, or light, for 7 days. If they survived, they were cleansed. If not, their soul was freed. People lined up, some begged to enter, others were dragged in. None came out whole. By the 4th day, screams would echo through the stone like wails from hell. Ewald said this was proof it was working. He recorded the names of the survivors in a black book, a relic that would later disappear, stolen by a fleeing novice who realized too late that miracles built on torment weren't miracles at all. Outside the monastery, cities fell further into chaos. One town burned its physician alive after he failed to cure a noble's son. Another forced plague victims into wine cellars and bricked them in, praying the rot would stay underground. People no longer feared death. They feared being chosen for a cure. And in the villages, something worse spread than the plague: blame. Women who brewed teas were accused of witchcraft. Men who didn't cough were accused of hiding symptoms. Children who cried too loudly were silenced with rope. In the desperate need to feel in control, humanity turned on itself. The last cure wasn't a tonic nor a prayer, it was cruelty. When the plague finally began to vanish, not through ritual or science, but because it had run out of hosts, the survivors didn't rejoice. They didn't rebuild temples or throw festivals. They simply sat, silent among bones, asking themselves what they had become. Because the true legacy of the Black Death wasn't just in the millions it killed, it was in what it revealed. That sometimes the darkest part of a disease is how far we'll go to feel safe from it. If you thought this story was disturbing, good. That means you're paying attention. Subscribe, because the Middle Ages are filled with forgotten horrors just like this one. And trust me, the worst parts, they're never in the textbooks.